one has to be
Thank
careful.
you all for coming. We still have a few seats kind of scattered. If anybody wants to go down. Otherwise, my name is Bex. I'm the events coordinator here at Books Over Magic. We're so freaking excited to have you all here tonight with Iman, Mersal, and Dayna Tortorici to celebrate motherhood and its ghosts. I just have a few housekeeping notes to go over before we start. At the end of the evening, we'll be doing a hand-raised Q&A. You can give your questions, so I'll have them type. We'll try to get them answered. Afterwards, Iman will be signing and personalizing near where you checked in. We'll let you know when and where to line up for that. If you're joining us virtual live stream, we'd love to encourage you to buy a copy of Motherhood and Its Ghosts online using the link in the description. You all conceivably read the event, right? Or bought a ticket tonight and already kind of know what was happening because you came. So instead of reading from that, I'm going to read from my own shelf talker for this book. I have a shelf talker for all of Iman's books because they're amazing and you should read them all. What can't Iman Mersal do? This small and precise ode / investigation / compendium / epistle / obsession for motherhood is further proof that the universal is the specific and the specific is universal. Here is motherhood in all its stickiness and silkiness, courtesy of Egypt's greatest living writer. Star of tonight's show, Iman Mersal is an Egyptian writer, translator, and literary scholar, a professor of Arabic language and literature at the University of Alberta. She is the author of 5 books of Arabic poetry. English translations of her poetry have appeared across many publications, and in 2022, her collection The Threshold, translated by Robin Cresswell, was shortlisted for the Griffin Poetry Prize and won the 2023 National Translation Award. Mersal received the 2021 Sheikh Zayed Book Award in Literature for Treatise of Enayat, which we also have here tonight. It was one of the best books I've ever read. It starts with a conjunction, and so if that's not enough to convince you to buy it, I don't know what will. Published in English translation by Transit Books this year. Transit and N+1 are co-sponsors of tonight's event. More people are coming in. It distracted me. We're so excited. So many people are here. Dayna Tortorici is our conversation extraordinaire, is a writer and co-editor-in-chief of N+1, which we also have for you to purchase. 5 books. The NEA was cut. So many people lost their funding, including Transit. So buy books. If we sell out, you can also order them from us. Anyway, that's all. Thank you so much. Without any further ado, please welcome Iman and Dayna.
Sorry? There is room here.
Oh yes, there's a couple of seats. Can you hear me okay? Is this mic on? There's a couple of seats in the front if anybody wants to sit, though you're welcome to stand in the back if you prefer. So thank you so much to Books Are Magic for having us tonight. I'm so excited to talk about this book, Motherhood and Its Ghosts, and also a bit about Traces of Enayat, which N+1 also excerpted in a previous issue of the magazine. A beautiful book. I highly recommend reading both of them. And so to start, I wanted to just speak a little bit about this beautiful book for anyone in the audience who is not already familiar with it. And then I think we'll read a little bit from it and talk more about the book. So this is a really interesting text. I think genre-wise, it would fall under the umbrella term of creative nonfiction, though I think that this kind of fails to contain it in some way and making it sound more generic than it is. It has 4 kind of chapters or 4 parts that are each sort of distinct, though unified by the same sensibility and kind of questing, inquisitive energy. The first is almost an argumentative essay that opens, which I believe is called On Motherhood and Violence. This was an essay that was originally written for a magazine, and it's about the sort of threatening and hostile relationship between the fetus and the maternal body, about guilt as a defining emotion of motherhood. Mersal writes that that's the emotion that unites all mothers, whatever their differences, which I think is quite unfortunately true. About the relationship between guilt and medical knowledge, that knowledge and maternal death, I think something that anyone who has gone through pregnancy recognizes pretty intimately. And then also about being a writer and a mother and the sort of tug of war between your own time and the time that no longer belongs to you. Part 2, How to Find Your Mother in Your Portrait, is what we'll be reading a bit from. This is about the one photograph of Iman's mother that she has. This was taken in a portrait studio in a town nearby their village. It was taken just I think, less than 2 months before your mother died when you're 7 years old. And it's the two of them in this almost kind of unrecognizable formal setting, already kind of ghostly in its artifice that, of course, takes on an extra haunted dimension, being the kind of one remaining vestige of photographic evidence of her mother's existence that she then kind of uses as a jumping off point into a longer kind of exploration of photography, a kind of haunted medium in itself. And also he uses that to talk about family photo albums and the 19th century, which I guess, genre of what's called the hidden mother. You talk about an Italian artist, Linda Nagler, who finds these archival images in which a baby is sort of isolated in the photo, but because a baby will not sit still long enough for the exposure to register an image, there's a mother usually hiding behind some piece of furniture or draped in enormous mountains of fabric to kind of hold the baby, and occasionally you can see like a hand or something. And there are these very funny, but occasionally also very sad and moving images. So you talk about this kind of genre of photography as both a metaphor and kind of a not metaphor. And then, of course, images of mothers in the archive, both documentary photography and art photography. Part 3 is a journal from 2000, excerpts from her journal from 2006 or 7 to, I think, 2016. This is the part of the book that we excerpted in N+1. I think there's copies of the magazine if you'd like to check it out. This is an incredible, incredible part of the book, largely about your everyday existence as a mother, as your younger son, Yusuf, is as a very young child facing like extreme psychological distress. And then the 4th part is about mourning, and it kind of returns to the voice established in the 1st and 2nd chapters of the book, but kind of ties it all together. So it's a gorgeous book. Again, I really, really recommend taking home a copy tonight. And I guess to start, this is a really interesting structure for a book. And I wanted to know how you came upon the structure, if you wrote it incrementally, if you wrote it all kind of in one stretch. We've talked a little bit before, you and I, about how the book came to be, but for the audience, I was wondering if you could tell the story of the original essay and how that kind of turned into a larger book project. You have your own. Beautiful. Great. We have 2 umbilical cords tonight.
Hello, thank you for coming. No, I didn't know that there would be a book, and I didn't know how it would look like because I started with this really short piece, supposedly, about my reading in feminist literature and how I thought that my questions are not addressed in these books at all, because I thought different feminist discourses are interested in negotiating the patriarchy, the institutions. They don't talk about the motherhood from within, which I thought that there is lots of struggle and I can't articulate it, and talking about it would make you feel guilty. So as if there was no support from these readings to help me understand my own struggle with motherhood. But while writing this article, or essay, I started to think that there is something more. It's kind of a wound behind it, and this wound might be very old, from the death of my mother, from my experience of being a mother in Canada, in a foreign land, without knowing the language well, or being a part really of the society. And it made me more interested in writing about this struggle, not explicitly about myself, but like, for example, it seems like something like the only picture I had of my mother, which I went to more than once in my poems, were still a mysterious photo, and I couldn't understand it. She remained a ghost. I can't reconcile with her image or her picture in this, her image in this picture. I try to go back differently, thinking about literature, about poetry, and then the Hidden Mother collection of Nagler was very, very inspiring because the metaphor became more than a metaphor.
Mhm.
It made me think about why do I can't see my mother in her own picture. So
Mhm.
this was the second chapter, and it goes on and on.
Mhm.
The third chapter in particular was very special because I did not intend to talk about my family or my son at all. It's safe to talk about dead people usually than alive people, mothers who are dead than children who are facing, any psychological problems. But I felt really that there was something missing, something huge
Mhm.
that is moving me around all of these themes, uh, to explore them, to try to find my own language expressing myself. There was a sentence that is closed and hidden, is about my own experience as a mother, and this is
Mhm.
how the third chapter came.
Mhm.
Yeah, which was very difficult to do.
Yes. Can you tell me a little bit about how you underwent that process? Because that's almost a decade of diaries.
Mhm.
Did you, how did you decide what to include? Because, obviously this is just excised pieces.
Yes.
It's not the whole thing. Was it difficult? Are you in the habit of rereading your diaries, or do you usually not look back at them? Was it a sort of different process? I don't know if you usually mine them for poetry, but this is a different experience. Can you talk a little bit about how you made those decisions of what to include and what not to?
So, unfortunately, I started to write my diary from a very early age. I go back to it sometimes to remember things, um, just to enjoy reading it or to be angry at whatever I wrote then, whatever. But I don't include my diary usually in my writing. What happened here is I try to write about my son three times actually. Every
Mm.
time I would write like pages.
Mhm.
And then I feel this is not the tone of voice. This
Mm.
is not the way I want to write
Mhm.
this story. And so I looked, randomly in my diary, and I found some dreams.
Mhm.
And this was like, wow, these dreams are speaking to me
Mhm.
while I'm trying to understand what we went through. And also some entries were very important because it's not about my son only, it's about also my life.
Mhm.
It's about mobility, being in Boston different than being in Cairo, thinking about him while you are away for extended time is different than being frustrated in the morning
Right.
trying to bring him to school, like all of these moments.
Mhm.
So I selected some entries, and I was very aware that gaps in the story are more than what is introduced.
Mhm.
And I thought this is absolutely fine.
Mhm.
We don't tell our story from A to Z. I mean, it's not what writing is about
Right.
anyway. I want to communicate with not just mothers who are going through what I'm going through and they can't articulate it, but also even my son, a generation that is coming, and they might recognize
Mhm.
this kind of struggle.
One thing I liked so much about it is that, I can't universalize, but my experience of motherhood so far, I have a 2-year-old, is that my memory is just like wiped. Like part of this is because I don't sleep very much, but it's just amazing how much doesn't get recorded. And part of this is physiological. That starts even with birth. Like part of the reason you're flooded with um, I think oxytocin, the hormone that's released after you give birth, is an amnesiac. So you're supposed to forget the experience and pain of childbirth, so you'll do it again. Like this is how the species manages to keep doing this crazy thing. But to the point where I also keep a journal, not very well anymore. But when I look back and I see what I have written down from the moments when I managed to, so much detail that I just completely forgot. And I can imagine that there was like a level of specificity
Yeah.
or fine grainedness that had just been erased from memory that kind of came back
Yes.
to life in this. I want to ask you a question about specificity in your work in a little bit, but I think first I'd like for you to read a bit from the section about the portrait of your mother, and then you'll read it in Arabic and I'll read it in English.
I read part of it in Arabic.
Okay,
not-
you can read part of it in Arabic and I'll read
Yes.
it in English.
So these passages are. So after going with my mother to a studio in the city, because of course living in a village for my social class, we didn't really have camera until I was like maybe in mid school. So when we went to the studio, we of course wear our best clothes, and my mother has braids. She had to get rid of it, but in the picture you can see still the traces of
Oh,
her braids and so on. So when we went to the studio, this kind of studio, they have drop off scenes.
oh yes. Yeah.
So there is ice, snow. It might be the Rockies Mountains while you are in a little town in Mansoura, in Egypt. So somehow, and I don't remember if my mother chose or the photographer, he chose this kind of colonial house, beautiful colonial house. And we took the picture in front of it as if it's our house. إذا رأيت هذه الصورة ضمن أرشيف من الصور وأنت لا تعرف أي سرد حولها، قد تتخيل أما وابنتها أمام سور بيتهما الأنيق. صورة عادية تنتمي لصور المتن العام، للأمومة الواضحة إلى درجة كونها غير مرئية. إذا أعجبك البيت فقد تتخيل أنهما ستدخلان بعد قليل من بابه لتناول الغداء، أو أنهما كانتا في طريقهما لتمشية في الوادي المجاور. أما بالنسبة لي فقد ظلت أمي في الصورة شبحا. ربما من المستحيل أن أعرف أمي وهي تقف أمام بيت استعرناه من أجل الصورة، بيت ادعينا أنه بيتنا قبل أن نعيده إلى أصحابه، مع ذلك ظل موجودا كبديل للبيت الذي عشنا فيه معا.
Okay. If the house appeals to you, you might imagine that shortly the pair will walk in through the front door to eat their lunch, or that they're about to take a walk around the neighboring valley. To me, my mother in this picture remains a ghost. It is perhaps impossible for me to recognize my mother standing outside a house we'd borrowed for the sake of a picture, a house we pretended was ours before returning it to its owners. Even so, it continues to exist, an alternative to the house in which we lived together. My mother remained more present to me in her possessions: the crochet, the birds and needlepoint, the set of Romeo and Juliet coffee cups of which she was so proud, the fridge door whose nighttime creak was like a haunted windmill, its handle with the head of a young woman and a fish's tail. Or, before my sister and I broke it open to see the people who lived inside, the radio with its multiple covers, its buttons and dials slotting through pre-cut holes when you changed them. If I'd been more aware and someone had asked me about, quote, my mother's picture, unquote, I would have shown them the bird she'd stitched onto the canvas herself. It is not aesthetic vision or skill that summons my mother's presence in the canvas, but the slate punctum the bird gives me. I get nothing of this sort from our studio portrait. The bird's eyes are always looking at me, as though they belong to her, the bird, motionless, for whose sake my mother sat and stitched by the window where the light came in, each pinprick a symbolic laceration in the process of its embodiment, cuts by the 100 to make it whole. Can you tell me why you wanted to read this passage?
I think, sorry. There is always, passages or sometimes one paragraph, one sentence in a book. They are not the best or the most beautiful or anything, but it's really the moment you recognize what you are doing, what are you after. And when you are writing and feeling lost and you reach this, it's an amazing moment. Even if the book will not be finished,
Yes.
Yeah.
So this was that part for you.
I think so. I think I started really to reconcile with even the death of my mother through writing this chapter. And also to to try to move a little bit what I felt like crisis in my family life.
Hmm.
Um, Try to understand it also
Yeah.
in different way.
The needlepoint, was it, I'm curious about its sort of metaphorical extension, if to you it had a metaphorical extension, the sort of pointillism of these, excuse me, these little kind of pricks of light coming through, being almost a, you know, a figurative way of talking about how a picture kind of comes to be, sort of stitch by stitch, or if it was actually just the material memory, like you know, there's something evocative to you that has nothing to do with the metaphor of a kind of mosaic or stitch work. It's actually just this object was meaningful to you in itself, or was it both?
I'm not sure if I really able to distinguish between metaphors and realities. Like I see reality through metaphor. I mean, metaphor can have its full meaning because of its relation with reality. So inheriting um, family history or your mother um, object, and not be able to see your mother in her own picture, while you can actually feel her presence through these objects. I think it's both metaphor and reality.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of returning to something that I alluded to previously about specificity in your writing, related to the metaphor question. One thing that I noticed immediately about your writing, and that you also discussed in an interview in Badoon magazine, is there's something very grounded and humorous and also located in the specific and in the detail in your writing, that even when you're speaking about something, writing about something very broad and generalizable like motherhood, whenever things get a little bit too lofty, you have this way of kind of bringing it down, and often in a sort of humorous register. And if you'll allow me, there's one, sounds very abstract, so there's one tiny example of this that I wanted to read. So this is the part about guilt. So you say, you know, this is when you're talking about guilt as being sort of constitutive of motherhood. Guilt is also generated in the gap between the ideal of motherhood in the dominant narrative and the failures that attend it in daily life. So central an emotion, in fact, that it serves as a viable definition for a mother's quotidian experience. Your son's weight is below average for his age. You can't be feeding him enough. He woke terrified from a nightmare because he doesn't feel safe. You didn't hug him at the school gate because you were late for work. You never learned to skate. Even so, you will take him to the ice rink, cue in temperatures several degrees south of zero, and can offer no assistance when it comes to wrestling on the extraordinary boots. And in the end, he will go off to skate alone while you wait in the cafe reading a book. You are moody in the morning, distracted in the evening. Other mothers enjoy playing chess and have memorized numerous children's rhymes. I mean, there's so much to love about this. It starts as this almost very lofty sort of disquisition. There are something, for a moment, you're like, oh, yes, you're speaking very generally. There's this person who has the problem with the feeding and this, the weight. And then, you know, there's no one else who's you're talking about with the ice skates besides yourself, right? And it's very funny, but and very relatable. And it occurred to me that there was something almost kind of feminist in this quotidian grounding, sort of across your writing, that there's something about the sort of anti-symbolic quality of specificity that is important to kind of reclaim in women's writing. And I was wondering if, I mean, that's how it sort of seems to me as a reader, but I wonder if that resonates with you, or if that seems conscious to you when you're writing at all, that there's a kind of, there's an importance to writing in this sort of humorous or grounded specificity as a kind of anti-reification of the feminine or women, or, you know, these kind of idealized narratives that people kind of disappear behind.
I really hope I understood your question right.
No, I mean, if you didn't, it's my fault.
No, because it's layered. um, well, I think you are maybe trying to do what you can't find sometimes. So, for example, it's so helpful to read um, in feminism,
Mhm.
right? I mean, I think I personally had great interest in reading different feminist discourses from a young age.
Mhm.
But sometimes you can't find really what you want. It's like I agree with all of that,
Mhm.
but where is exactly this connection, this kind of taking the idea and walk in life with it and make it your own.
Mhm.
And my way of doing this sometimes in writing, I'm not talking about poetry, I'm talking about prose in general, is really this waving the ideas with everyday life.
Mhm.
I think this is how I feel things and understand it. It's
Mhm.
not a style, it's not something I choose, but this is my way always of understanding
Mhm.
my surroundings. So,
So it feels more less about some kind of feminist project, but it's just more
yeah.
kind of ingrained in just how you navigate the world and understand things.
Because the contribution to, if there is a feminist project or projects,
Right.
the really the contribution of literature and art is enormous.
Mhm.
And and my understanding of my main dilemma with motherhood. I'm sorry, Murad, my son is here, and I'm saying this. This is so bad. So, came from literature and arts,
Mhm.
not from feminism. So,
Wait, sorry, what came from literature and
like
art?
my way of articulating my,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
my anxiety about motherhood, for example, arts can help us. I mean, reading Coetzee, for example, is a Elizabeth Costello,
Yes.
and it's in one scene. She is supposed to be a great writer in the novel, and I mean, she is very boring, of course, but I mean, this is Coetzee. But anyway, her son is sitting in the audience, seeing her talking about animal, great language, great presence, whatever. And he is thinking, this woman was not able to tell us bedtime story when we were children. She used to scream at us, me and sister in London, and tell us to go to the room. I mean, this hit me like crazy,
Hmm.
right? I was reading and it's like, did I do that? So sometimes literature is really the source of not just discovering our questions, but make us walk toward it just to find it
Mhm.
if we have some questions.
Mhm.
So did they answer you?
Yeah, I think so. Or if you answered another question, it was more interesting than what I was after. One thing that I love in the book is the recurring um, interest in bedtime stories
Mhm.
and in lullabies, and I think it's in the epilogue of the book where Yusuf, your son, writes about a memory, something that maybe makes him happy, or I don't
Mhm.
remember specifically
One
what
of
it
his
is.
best memory. Yeah.
Yes, his best memory, and it's my mother singing, I think, "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star," but making it sad and with the wrong rhythm. Because you write about how you never knew how to sing these like English lullabies correctly, and they're like,
Yes.
"No, Mama, you're making it too sad," because you have this sort of, I think you call it a bedtime dirge or
Yeah.
something like that. It's really great. I want to pivot quickly and ask you a couple questions about translation because this book is obviously translated into English, and you've had your poetry translated into English, and you've also translated books into Arabic. Um, what was the process of translating this book compared with having your poetry translated? Was it more or less difficult? Is there something about the density and economy of poetry that made that more challenging and this less, or did it surprise you in any way?
Um, Poetry has its own difficulty in terms of translation. So my experience with Robin Criswell in particular was amazing because sometimes you are not happy about this word, but you don't know why. I mean, I don't have a solution and I don't know why. So it's it's very complicated. But it made me more than once actually think about my relation with Arabic language. Why did I choose this verb in the first place? Writing the poem, you don't think about this stuff, like you know. So, but through translation, you learn about actually your relation with your own language too. So poetry might be um, sensitive in so many ways because of its musicality. It's actually also a space on the page. So Arabic language is very like
Compact.
yes, compact. So a 100 pages novel in Arabic will be 200 in German and 130 in English and so on. So so this was different challenges with Motherhood book and with Traces of Inayat. I think I had so many discussions with Robin Meager, who is really, both of them are great translators, Criswell and Meager, but many about really I don't know. I don't believe in a woman language versus man language, but sometimes you feel like it's almost this is a problem. So if we are talking about motherhood, for example, word choice was something, and I would go and search because I don't have the right word, but I would suggest sometimes things, and he might accept or refuse. But in general, really, I believe the art of translation is so beautiful and important because until I was almost 30, I didn't have, I wasn't able to read in English at all. And I remember in high school in one of the state newspapers once, so they would have whatever garbage in the state newspapers, the president 2 pages, I don't know what 3 pages, but then there is this culture page that usually is great.
Yeah.
So and you don't understand why, because no one reads it, like, so they can do whatever, whoever is responsible for it. So once I found this short poem, and in Arabic it started with أنا لا أحد فمن أنت. I am no one, so who you are, I think, or who are you? Yeah. And it turned out that it's a poem by Emily Dickinson. I cut it and I put it in my room, and I thought this is so beautiful. Later on, I discovered some not, I mean, some awkward sentences in the short poem. Like, it could be much better, but however, this structure, bringing this structure in Arabic, negating ginawan with le, which is used to negate um, verb mostly, present tense, was just fascinating. And I thought, oh my God, poetry is elsewhere. Like there is poetry somewhere that I don't know and I want to know. So even reading bad translation can show you the light, the beauty out there. This is my my understanding of translation.
That's great. I love that poem. I am
too.
nobody in English. I am nobody. Who are you? And
Yeah.
there's something about the last line is how public, like a frog, or
yes.
something, because belching all day long about
Yes.
how important
And
you
this
are.
frog dufda in Arabic was like a shock. Wow, this is so beautiful. So this is just an example of how translation, I mean, it can open windows in things that are even mysterious and not clear, but if you have time, you will get it later. So
yeah. This reminds me that I also wanted to ask you, or talk a little bit about Traces, because it has a great connection with this book, because you wrote Motherhood while you were in the middle of the Anayat book.
Yes.
Correct? Yes. And so, you open the book, for anyone who's not familiar, is you talk about how in the 90s you discover this novel. What, remind me her full name? It's Anayat El Zayed. And it strikes you with how there's just something about it you find that sort of speaks to you in a moment where you feel sort of outside the kind of dominant literary scene, and then you discover that this is this woman's only novel. It's out of print. Nobody knows anything about her, and that she committed suicide when she was 26, very young.
Yeah.
And so you
In 1963.
in
Which is
1963.
important, yes.
Yeah, tell me why that's important. Remind me, 1963.
I think because it was 30 years before I read her novel, and I believe in this mysterious messages from the dead. No, I'm just joking. I mean, the 60s and 50s in Arab world in general and in Egypt in particular, like the dominant discourse was really about big issues, nationalism and socialism, and why not? And of course, the cultural institutions were owned by the state. And they had a big project to publish a book every 6 minutes by the state. So great translations were introduced, lots of propaganda as well, lots of fine literature, but everything had to fit with this national project. So the idea that you read a novel that you never heard about it, it's not listed in any, any thing about Arab female writers or whatever, and then you ask a question why it was excluded, what is the canon of Arabic literature or any canon. This what made me at the beginning interested in Anayat before knowing the suicide and all of the drama, and this I became even more haunted knowing a little bit about her life, and this is how I started the book.
Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful because you go on this mission to find her, and you kind of hit a dead end at a certain point, right? You interview a family member, and they say there's no archive, there's nothing. And at one point, there's an incredible scene where you describe interviewing a family member, finding out that her son, who was taken from her when I think he's 1 or something, he's barely learned to walk. He also died very young, and there's a question of whether he also has died by suicide. Yes, and you've just discovered this. You get the chills. You're completely absorbed in this revelation, and then you get a call from your son's school. It's like a very icy day. You talk about going out for a walk because to be the bracing cold, because you have this. You're in the middle of this kind of reverie of discovery, and then you get a call from the school that's like, your son has slipped on the ice and he's injured his leg, you need to come pick him up, and it just sort of pulls you out, and it's such it's such a beautiful, it's such a funny and beautiful encapsulation of this, what you call the push and pull, the sort of tug of war of dual identity. And this is also when you introduce like, I started working on this other book, the Motherhood book, and then it's after the Motherhood book that you kind of go back to Anayat and think about her as a mother. And I wonder if, I know we're almost out of time, and I do want to get to the audience questions, but just before we do, I wanted to ask whether not just being a mother, but reflecting on motherhood for this book how it changed your approach to writing about Anayat.
I mean, it really helped me to see that the archive is not the institutional archive. It's not what the family kept from Anayat. The archive is out there, and I can trace it if I want, if I have the right energy and desire to know her. So, for example, Anayat was, a bourgeoisie woman. So what is the politics of bourgeoisie in Egypt during this socialist regime, or being in a battle of custody? What is the law? Or taking this kind of treatment for depression in the 40s and 50s. As a child, even she was taking treated for depression. What does it mean to be that? And what does it mean to be a mother? Writing your own novel, and all of these publishing houses refused to publish it in 1961, 62, 63. So motherhood was really a key in trying to understand Anayat. and also thinking about the archive differently. The archive
Mhm.
is not, sometimes it's not given to us,
Mhm.
because those who organized it, maintained it, protected it, did not want, did not think about Annette as an important writer to begin with,
Mhm.
right? I'm the one who is thinking that, and
Mhm.
it's my responsibility as individual
Mhm.
to recover her story and to understand it.
Mhm. Well, it's beautiful. It's a wonderful book.
Thank you.
So now I think we'll turn to some audience questions, and we'll take as many as we have time for. Any brave souls?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes. Um,
Oh, hold on. We've got one up here. Hi. Yes, please. Yes, yes, yes.
Hi. Thank you so much. That was fascinating to listen to. And I suppose because you're dealing with the difficulty of motherhood so much and the guilt and so on and so on, did you ever come across, a kind of self-censoring voice that I was wondering how you deal with what you can and cannot speak about. I mean, were there things you felt you could not write about? How did you deal with?
Oh, I just want to repeat the question for the live stream people. So your question was, did you encounter or how did you deal with this sort of self-censoring that attends maternal guilt when writing this book? Is that about right, more or less? Okay.
I hear people talk all the time about freedom of speech, but I think censorship, since I grew up in Egypt, is always useful for writing, actually, because it makes you find solutions that you wouldn't think about otherwise. For me, I think the difficult part was really talking about my son, and I did my best to find another solution, because when you select entries from your diaries, even if you summarized it, or of course you don't put everything, there are so many gaps, and you are morally responsible for it. You are the one who is speaking. You could be anything. You could be sincere or wrong or right. I don't know. But at least I wanted to take this responsibility. Yeah. So this was my solution in the book.
Maybe here and then back there, and then back there.
Sorry.
Yes, you first.
I'm curious how your journaling has changed over the years because you've experienced so many lives, and especially like before and after motherhood. Anything about like the ritual, the purpose, the frequency? Would love to know.
So the question was how her journaling has changed over the years, having lived so many lives, both the frequency, the process, all of that.
I mean, it changed with age too, because with motherhood, as a mother of young kids, sometimes you don't have even time to finish your entry. You fall asleep while writing, right? So it's like there was something I wanted to say there, but I fell asleep tired. And sometimes it's very short, as short as shit, like one word. Like I have no idea why that day in particular was that tough, right? But anyway, it's there. It occupies time, and time I lived and I can't remember. But sometimes there are these really beautiful moments that you write them and you have energy to write them in detail. You know what I mean? For no reason, like just a conversation with your child, or a meal with a friend, or whatever you write about it in there. So it tells you also about your state of mind, because I go sometimes for a week without writing any, and then very intense writing in my diary. Yeah.
Do you also censor when you journal?
No, because hopefully no one will see it.
So no censoring when you journal, just
My son asked me actually this week, visiting me, what I would do with all of these notebooks.
do you
And
know?
I told him, Yani, I don't want anybody to see them. They are diaries. They are not writing. So, yeah.
So what are you saying? You saying burn them after you die?
I think people, if I'm aware of my death, I would do myself, because when people when people leave stuff it's really responsibility. It's like it's the invitation
Hmm.
to do something with it, right?
Right.
And this is why I was very sad, because Inayat left the draft of her second novel and her diary, but her family got rid of it,
Mm.
except a few entries I found here and there, scattered in the city.
Mm.
But when people leave it in purpose, that means like they wanted to do something with it. So we'll see.
We'll see. Okay, so I think there was one person back here. Yes.
Yeah. But what if someone wants to do traces of Iman Mersal?
What if someone wants to do
No, no,
traces?
that's
Okay, yes. What's your real
So the
question?
actual question is, so I'm interested because I read these books in order, obviously. So I saw that. I was reading it as a development, like from okay, the motherhood and scopes, and then I am building off of that. But it's interesting to me that like there was that insertion in the middle. Um, and I was wondering because you talked about like Coetzee and those things inspiring a bit
Mhm.
this text. I was wondering if there's anything from like Anayat or that first bit of research that you did, or even from her novel that you feel went into Motherhood and Scopes.
So the question is, were there pieces of traces of Anayat that ended up in Motherhood since they were sort of
Yeah.
imbricated?
Actually, there is part of Inayat story and depression was really connected to her relation with her mother, a Turkish aristocrat in Cairo, bourgeoisie, who doesn't believe what my daughter is doing in her life. I mean, she is getting divorced and she is writing a novel. So it seems like, and I found some material. I didn't want this to be part of Annette's story somehow. I mean, I just pointed to it. It's like the divorce case. I didn't want to use it a lot, and I wanted to bring all of these different languages to the book, but without displaying her life in a veteran, in the pages. So her relation with her mother, and one of the entry in her diary was very clear about even that she doesn't like her mother.
Hmm.
And this is the only thing I saw her saying that radical about anybody. And actually, it made me think about all of these different relations with mothers that we just don't talk about, and you know um, it's shame to talk about it, um, or we are not ready to talk about it, or blah blah blah. So it opens to me also when I was working in motherhood, that there is no one motherhood. This idea of unconditional love and devotion and blah 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 are really, I mean, they are there. All of this love is there, but there are other things. And love itself can be buried sometimes under something much bigger than it. So let's talk about it.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and I think I promised it to you. Yes.
Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Good comment. The cover is fascinating. The question is, how long did it take you milling around the photograph to decide that you want to write about it?
About it?
About the photograph of your mother. How long did it take you to actually think about it, look at it, or avoid it, shun it?
Mm-hmm.
This is something I thought of writing about my own mother, and it takes so long.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Gives us your insight.
So I think you are asking about the hidden mother photography.
No, your own mother.
Yeah, so my own mother, I mean, this was, my mother died when I was 7. So this is the only picture of me and my mother ever. Like, there is no other pictures. We went to the studio, we took the picture. She died less than 2 months later. So the picture started to be, as Suzanne Sontag would say, it's like an elegy. So it became so important, and this is why visiting it again and again, fighting over it, even before we found a way to make copies of it. It was the only copy, and it was always with me.
Hmm.
And so visiting it, and again and again, you can't see your mother in it. Where is my mother? And so this appeared from my very early poems. I wrote a poem when I was in 5th grade, which I read in Mother Day. I was so angry at the school because they are celebrating, of course, Mother Day, and no one, of course, in this elementary school would pay attention to anyone without a mother. So I was talking about in one of the lines about my mother picture. And it goes in every poetry book almost there is at least an image in a poem about this photo. But to go back and take it seriously, meaning why, how can I see her in her picture, I had to ask much bigger questions about the image of mother in archive in general. They are invisible actually, because the intention behind the picture, the arrangement of the picture, the maternal gaze, everything make mother um, invisible. It becomes invisible or instrumental mother, as I called it, when there is crisis, contradictory, scandal, you know, the mother is naked like Demi Moore or Annie Lubavitch, right? So there's something, we need something to have another look at our mother photo.
Okay, I think we'll end
There
it
was
there.
one question.
Oh yes,
here.
do we have time for maybe one
1
more?
minute.
Okay, yes, please.
I was wondering if you felt like you came to understand your own mother better through this process, or was that even a goal that you had? Or did it end up being more about yourself as a mother or than as a daughter?
So did you come to understand
Yeah.
anything about your mother in the process? Sorry to be so pedantic. We're repeating
No,
it
it's
for the
nice.
people on the
Thank you.
internet.
So they say in Arabic usually that you will know the value of your mother when you are a mother, but they are talking about love, like this unconditional love that you will experience toward your kids, your children. So you would recognize it in your mother. But I think really we, in my case at least, I recognized my mother when I become a mother, not in terms of love, because I take it for granted. It was about that she was a woman. She was a young woman, actually. And I never asked myself about her dreams. What did she want to do in her life? What was she in a happy marriage? Was she content of being a mother that early in her life? Like according to the tradition, she got married, a year later she has a baby, which is me. So so asking a question about a mother as a person is very important. And I think this is what I learned from being a mother.
Okay, thank you so much for coming. Please buy the book by Tracy Hernandez. Thank you for having us.
Thank you both so much for being here. Thank you all so much for joining us. If you show up for the live stream, you can buy a copy of the book in the link in the description. If you're here, you can race to the back, not in this moment, but in a couple moments. Race to the back and buy a copy of the book. We, to be honest, don't have that many left. So in case we run out, you can also order a book through us. And support transit and support us and support independent capitalism. Where we can get it. Iman will be signing and personalizing where my coworkers are now pointing. If you can see them over.
Thank you very much.
Some of our very tall friends. If you can all just stay in your seat for a second while I rush Iman and the quarterback back there. And then we will get the signing line going down the center aisles. Please make sure to grab your belongings. We do pick up the chairs as soon as the signing line starts. And thank you all so much for coming and have a great night.
Thank you.